So first off, how big a pull is there from the community to get away from coal?
I think when you look across the Northwest, in particular the West Coast, almost all of our customers are telling us that renewables and getting away from a carbon base in the energy sector is important. We see that in Eugene in particular in my case, but if you look across California, Oregon, Washington, in particular the West Coast states, our customers are telling us, both large and small customers are telling us they want a more renewable, more sustainable energy source.
So the era of coal is coming to an end?
I would say the era of coal in the energy sector is coming to an end. It is by far the worst offender when it comes to carbon generation in the electric sector. If you're going to pick your priorities, coal would be obviously the first one. There are planned retirements across the region, both in Oregon and Washington, but also in Montana and Wyoming and others that feed into the Northwest and energy sector.
Which brings the reason for this whole meeting.
Right.
Is there going to be enough power when all this reliable coal goes away?
Well, the real challenge for us all is that we operate in some ways independently based on utilities, but our system is interconnected. Throughout the West, the Western Interconnect includes 9 Western states and 2 countries and 2 provinces in Canada. The opportunity is that there's a diversity of resource that as a region we need to leverage in order to integrate new renewables and replace coal in a way that meets our reliability standards, our safety standards, and also is affordable to our customers, which is also important.
Are you basically saying that there's a lot of pools that you can pull from?
I think if we want to adapt to the changes in our energy sources, we have to do that as a region. We have to team up and look at this as an opportunity to coordinate with other utilities, other states. There is a diversity of resources throughout the West. We have to be able to move the electric generation from where it's generated to where it's consumed, and we have to be able to do that to integrate more renewables that eventually will replace coal and other fossil fuel-based energy sources.
And looking out to 2025, is there a concern that if there's not a lot of renewables brought online, there won't be enough to replace the coal that's going away?
I think when you look at the near term, we see some indications that we need to get busy as an industry and address the problem proactively, turn the problem into an opportunity. There are some early indications that from a capacity perspective, which I would describe as trying to fly through the mountains at average altitude, you have to have an energy system that meets the peak demand of whatever sector you're talking about, so throughout the West. We do think that it can be addressed, but we need to create a resource adequacy program that involves multiple states and includes the entire Western Interconnect. That's why we're here today.
And you started to say it and then you sort of veered away from it, but you said there's some early indicators of what?
So when you look back at the energy crisis that occurred in the early 2000s, that actually started in the 1990s. Some of it was based on research and analysis that people like the Northwest Power Council did, but we also started to see price excursions in the market. This last March, we saw the price per megawatt hour skyrocket for a very short period of time. It's sort of a heart palpitation that we have to wake up to and recognize that market excursions then evolve into both availability of resource from a market perspective and then potentially to the physics of the system.
So in March, there was some sort of a shortage and the price spiked, right?
Yeah, in March we saw prices that normally might be in the $40 per megawatt hour skyrocket to over $900 a megawatt hour.
Wow.
That was alarming to us, but it's an early indication that we have to pay attention to the balance between source and supply.
And if you take away too much source or supply, ratepayers are going to be paying a ton to be able to buy that electricity somewhere else.
Right. The important balance between supply and demand is that different types of resources can generate electricity at different times. Wind and solar are generated at the dispatch by Mother Nature. Mother Nature determines when wind and solar are available. We have to balance that with some resources that we can dispatch in the Northwest when those are not generating. Hydroelectric is a great battery, for example. The Columbia River supplies a lot of hydroelectricity in the Northwest. And it can do that at a time when some of those other resources are unavailable. So it's not just a single resource, it's the mix of resources that is really important.
And is the concern, though, that there's a low water year and then you're in the middle of the summer or the middle of the winter and the wind's not blowing and maybe you've got clouds and all of a sudden you're in trouble?
Yeah, what we're really trying to analyze is that we have to plan for all of the different futures. There could be lower water years, drought conditions. With climate change, the potential for lower water years or a change in the water season is a potential. And we have to plan for how are we going to supply electricity under that condition when the wind isn't blowing, when the sun isn't shining. All of those in combination with high demand, so if we got a cold snap in the Northwest, with increasing electrification from transportation and electric vehicles, those are the scenarios that we have to plan for. When we do that planning, we do find that there are some situations that will require further investment in resources, particularly dispatchable resources or battery technology or further renewables.
So if something's not done to bring on more supply, there'll be a problem.
I think there's a sense of urgency to act. I think it's a combination of adding more renewables, looking at how we operate the hydro system, looking at how we import and export in and out of the region from California, for example, which has a lot of solar energy in the middle of the day. How do we capture that so that we can use that and invest that at a later time when we don't have the resource here? It's why it's a regional issue, which includes transmission.
Okay. And then one other thing that I didn't really understand in there, I think I heard on your panel a call for some sort of large umbrella authority that could help coordinate it. Does that not exist now? Everybody's just kind of individual?
Right now, there are, between the different states, there are different public utility commissions, there's different forms of governance. There is a Western interconnect, but as an industry, we need to come together and develop common standards that can be used to assess the supplies across the entire region. That particular authority does not exist. It may be one where we start initially as a voluntary program, but the industry and the electric suppliers throughout the Western region need to come up with a standard for allowing of the sharing of these resources.
Does that mean that one person could look at a set of conditions and say, we got plenty, another could look at the same set and say, no, we don't, because they're using different formulas?
That's exactly what can happen. In fact, I refer to that as virtual physics. At some point, utilities go through a planning process, and in that planning process, they have some physical resource that they commit to. It's called a firm resource. But they also understand that there will be times when they go out to the market for resources. If everybody goes out to the market and there are no physical resources to back up that market, you have a physics issue. At some point, you have a market, a pricing, and a physics issue. So closing that gap between what is planned and what is built is an important outcome of this regional look at the issue.
Okay, cool. And then as far as Eugene, are you doing any demand response, and are you finding, does that work with your customers?
I think demand response is one of the tools that we have to look at. Eugene does a little bit of it, mostly with some of our larger customers. Demand response can help shave the peaks, it can help move energy around, which will help with the balance of supply and demand. Both the supply side and the demand side have to contribute to the solution. We used to call this balancing in the industry, and what we're doing now is we're calling it synchronizing, because our resources are changing and our demand is changing. We have to be able to integrate those, not just in Eugene, but across the Northwest.
So two bigger picture questions. Eventually, is this going to mean costs going up for customers?
I think when we look at resources and we look at demand, and you have to look across the country, the Northwest has been blessed with low power prices for a long time. There will be some impact on prices, but we also have to recognize that reliability is incredibly important. What's the cost of an unreliable system? We do think there's investments to be made. We think there will be some impact on prices, but we want to do that in a prudent way that balances those increases and gets value out of those price increases relative to the environmental improvement and also the reliability that we can maintain.
Okay. And then my last kind of big 10,000-foot question, Is your industry going through kind of a tectonic change?
I think when you look back at the last 100 years, you saw the Industrial Revolution in the early 1900s, you saw the information age. I believe this century is all about energy. We are part of that. There's a massive shift between what we used for traditional sources, how those sources are used and managed, how customers participate in the industry. I absolutely agree that we are going through a phenomenal shift in this sector.